Have you ever smelt a whiskey that you know is peated, but it doesn't smell all that smoky? However, when you taste it, all the flavour just appears. You're hit by a barrage of smoke and beach bonfires. Or have you ever tasted a wine that on the palate was remarkably different to how it was on the nose? There's some interesting things going on here. So in this video, we're going to explore how we actually smell things in two different ways. We're going to look at the implications of this and how you can use this information to really transform how you taste whiskey and wine, or gin, beer, cocktails, anything that involves flavour. So, if you're ready, we're going to get stuck in and talk about olfaction. Right, let's get stuck into this. Olfaction is essentially the process of smelling stuff. It's not anything more complicated than that. The olfactory system is everything that's involved with smelling stuff. It's not just the nose, it's the receptors, the olfactory bulb, the brain, all the neural circuits, memories, emotions. It's everything. It's quite a remarkable thing when we look at smell. But that's what we're talking about. And we smell in actually two different ways that employ different brain regions and actually have different purposes and different functions. And this has created actually quite a lot of misunderstanding. We're also going to look at a really helpful professional tip that you're probably doing already, but actually you don't understand exactly why you're doing it and why it works. So with this information, you can really deepen your understanding. Okay, so let's start with something called orthonasal olfaction. What is it? Orthonasal olfaction. For all intents and purposes, this is sniffing, smelling, or if you want to be fancy, nosing. Let's draw a glass. So, here's our glass. Let's put something, what do you think, red? Some sort of red liquid in here. Could be red wine, could be port, could be some sherry cask whiskey, could be a red wine cask whiskey. You choose what you like the most. In here, we have lots of molecules that are called volatile molecules. Not because they're particularly highly strung and aggressive, but because they float about in the air. Once they get to the air interface between the liquid and the air, they start to float around. And when we take a sniff, in they come into, what is this? The nasal cavity. Now, what separates the nasal cavity from the oral cavity, aka the mouth, is this bit here, including the soft palate, that when you push your tongue into the roof of your mouth, this is essentially the roof of your mouth. It separates these two areas. So we're taking a sniff, these volatile molecules are travelling up here. When they're travelling up into the nasal cavity, they're going to interact with something called the mucous membrane, which sits at the top of the nasal cavity. In this mucous membrane, we have embedded olfactory receptors, odour receptors, essentially. When odour molecules come along, some of them will latch on to these odour receptors, and then the odour receptors will send signals to this area here, which is called the olfactory bulb. You can see this in process in this video, which is quite nice just to get your head around what's going on here. The olfactory bulb, once it receives that information, then sends signals to the brain, and the brain interprets that and decides what it's going to do. Now, the rather cool thing, well, I think it's cool anyway, about the sense of smell, olfaction, is that this olfactory bulb here is so close to the brain that it is essentially just an extension of the brain. So these signals that come from odours are going straight into the brain in a very direct manner. It's the only sense that we have that does this. All of the others rely on circuits of neural pathways and nerves to take those signals into the brain. Whereas the olfactory bulb is directly connected to the brain. It doesn't rely on a network so much. So this is orthonasal olfaction, sniffing, nosing. The other one we need to talk about is retronasal. Olfaction. Ta-da! Look at that. What is retronasal olfaction? Retronasal olfaction is what we commonly assume to be taste, flavour, palate, and finish. These terms are often used interchangeably to describe what is essentially the same thing. How does retronasal olfaction work? I hear you say. And why do I need to know this? So when we take a sip, the liquid obviously comes into the mouth, we swill, we kind of get into the whole thing, it's exciting. And then we either spit or we swallow. Some of these volatile molecules will then travel from the mouth round the back of the soft palate up into the nasal cavity, where they interact with the same odour receptors, sending signals to the olfactory bulb, which then sends signals to the brain. So essentially what we are saying is that we smell things in two completely different ways. Orthonasal olfaction, sniffing, retronasal olfaction, taste, mouthfeel, palate, finish, whatever it is you want to call it. When we take a sip of something, it ends up in the mouth and goes up into the nose. Two different routes to the same receptors. Of course, in the mouth, you also have your taste receptors, but they're pretty straightforward when you think about it, because it's just really sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, and that is it. Just those 5 tastes. There are probably others. Some people have suggested that there is up to 20 different tastes. Certainly, there's strong evidence to suggest that we can taste fattiness and maybe also calcium and other things. But for now, let's just say there are 5. Mouthfeel as well. Although mouthfeel is massively underrated, it's crucial for flavour. Mouthfeel is things like burning, cooling sensations, tannins, dry sensations, all of these kind of things happen in here. But compared to odours, they really pale into insignificance. If this is all of flavour, then really anything that isn't odours is maybe this much. Nobody really knows. It's impossible to work it out. So it's one of those mysteries. Some people have suggested that 80% of flavour is odour. We don't know. Let's just say it's a lot, okay? So what's going on in here really becomes odour in a big way. Now, why is it important to understand the difference between these two ways that we detect odours? Well, this is the really cool part. Depending on if we detect odours orthonasally or retronasally, the brain understands the route to the olfactory receptors here and sends the signals to different parts of the brain for processing. There was a study by Small et al. That I'll put in the description below. You can look it up. They did brain scans of people to understand how the brain processes the information, whether it's orthonasally or retronasally. In essence, they put a tube into people's mouths that could send individual odour molecules up into the olfactory receptors here. They looked at various different things, ones that were slightly fruity, but the important thing is when they introduced chocolate odour, they really noticed a big difference in how the brain processed that information, whether the chocolate odour was sent into the nasal cavity through the nose or through the mouth. So, what are you thinking? What was the difference? Well, essentially, when the chocolate odour was detected orthonasally, it really excited brain regions that they function through dopamine release. Dopamine is, of course, neurotransmitter. People think dopamine is all about pleasure. Actually, dopamine has a lot more to do with our desire to do things, how motivated we are. Motivation. Okay, so orthonasal olfaction is to do with dopamine, our wanting to do something. What difference does retronasal olfaction make? Well, this excited slightly different pathways. One was the opioid pathways. I have to concentrate here because this is a long word. Look at that, the longest word ever. The other pathways that it excited were the benzodiazepine, probably a familiar word for many people. Essentially, opioid pathways, benzodiazepine pathways, they're all to do with that cozy, comfy, warm, snug feeling, the James Brown feeling. I feel good, yeah? This is what this is all about, feeling good. This is all about motivation. As Berridge put it, this is to do with wanting. How much do I want to drink what is in my glass? This is to do with liking. How much do I like it? How pleasurable is it? So you can see, this is remarkable, is it not? Even though it's the same odour receptors, whether the molecules come through the nostrils or through the mouth changes how the brain how the brain interprets that information, and it either interprets a way to understand whether it's wanting to drink it or it's interpreting the information with regards to how much it's enjoying the process. It's quite remarkable when you look at it. Now, I did promise you a bit of a tip as well, because we can leverage this knowledge to improve how we taste. Now, you're probably doing this already, but here is the science behind it. When we sniff, when we nose, the molecules in the air have to travel through the nostrils, obviously. This isn't groundbreaking information, but consider this. you have a much larger cavity here in the nasal cavity, and also the air is going into the lungs down here. So breathing in through a small hole means that the air travels in a fairly smooth fashion down into the lungs. So these odoreceptors have a snapshot to be able to grab hold of odour molecules as they float past. Imagine a conveyor belt of shopping and you're just trying to grab your breakfast cereal, your pint of milk, your bottle of wine, whatever it is, as they go past on the conveyor belt. But each of your hands is a different odour receptor that will only grab certain things. So you're trying to grab them, but once they've gone, they've gone. You can't just run over them and get hold of them. So there's one opportunity to smell those odours. Now, when we've actually have this retronasal effect, odour molecules in the mouth, when we breathe out through the nose, the air is coming up here. Some of that air will be laden with volatile molecules that have been breathed in. Some of it will combine with the molecules that are still floating around in the oral cavity, and they'll come back up into the nasal cavity here. Now, because these nostrils are relatively small, it creates pressure. It's a bit like, imagine you've got a cold and you blow your nose. You can feel the pressure inside your nasal cavity pushing all the gunk out of your nose. It's pressure. Because of that pressure, rather than the air being able to escape freely, it creates turbulence, and that air circulates inside the nasal cavity. Because it circulates, it carries the volatile aroma molecules with it, and the olfactory receptors here have a greater opportunity to grab hold of those molecules. So rather than being at a conveyor belt at the supermarket and your food going past you and you have one opportunity to grab it, imagine you're at an airport and the luggage is going round and round on the carousel. You don't have just one opportunity to grab your bag, it's going to come round again. And this is what happens. Obviously, it's a little bit quicker than a carousel at an airport, but the main point is you can increase what you can smell by breathing out through the nose and really making the most of this opportunity for your receptors to grab hold of odour molecules. You probably do this already after you've taken a sip. It's natural to breathe out through the nose. This is what we commonly call finish, but it's crucial. It's really this. There will be some lasting sensations in the mouth, yes, for sure, but it's really what's going on here. So you can maximize that. So with your understanding that these two things work in different ways, they process in different parts of the brain, you can really get the most out of your experience of tasting. Now the really cool bit, which I think is quite liberating, there's lots of cool bits here, I do appreciate, I will probably overemphasize that each bit is really cool, but this bit is really cool. Because the brain processes these bits differently, and it's the same molecules, it makes us realize actually that flavour isn't in the glass. We like to think that here is the flavour, it's in the glass, and when you smell it, there it is. And that it has some sort of unique character that each person needs to try and discover. And it tastes a certain way, and someone will tell you, hey, this is how this whiskey should taste. And you go and smell it, and you taste it, and you think, oh yes, I get the coconut they're talking about, I get the vanilla, I get some butter. But this proves that actually the brain decides what it's going to do with this information that's in the glass. In here is just information, not flavour, just information. The brain makes sense of that information, it decodes it. If we take the brain out of the equation, it's like having an internet connection but no computer. The signals will be sent along, but there's nothing to interpret those signals, so therefore they don't make sense. You can't look down an Ethernet cable and expect to be able to read an email. You need your computer to do that. And it's the same here. All of these signals that get sent from the olfactory receptors are just signals. The brain organises them and it layers things like emotions and memories and mood and fatigue on top of this, so it will give you a different experience each time. What this means is, when you smell something and when you taste something, there's no right or wrong. How it smells and tastes to you is up to you. And this is incredibly liberating, because what it means is nobody can tell you what something should taste like. It's simple, but this makes sense of the whole thing. There's no right or wrong. It's all going on in here. And because we all have a different brain, we all have different life experiences, we all have different preferences, we all have different thresholds for how we can detect certain odours, it's going to be different for everybody. We will be doing a whole video on flavour. What is flavour? Because there's so much misinformation out there about that. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this is helpful. I hope when you come and taste something and go to a tasting, or just even having food, you can appreciate the difference between your orthonasal olfaction, retronasal olfaction, and how most of what you taste is in fact this, and the brain is is processing the information in different ways. So thank you very much for watching. Until next time, keep sniffing, keep sipping, and keep thinking. Cheers.